This is Dr. Hollisa Alewine. Welcome back to another episode of More Than. And in these episodes, or programs, or teachings, or whatever we want to call them, what we do is we try to break down something that we've read many times, but maybe there's more to it. And in this program, what I'd like to do is look at some things that happened in the life of Jacob, or Yaakov in Hebrew. Specifically, I'd like to look at some of the things that occurred after his exile with Laban, or Laban, as it's written in English. He's coming back, and he has his 11 sons, and he has his daughter Dena. And we know on this trip back, he's anxious up to a point because he's left a very angry Laban behind him, who he knows will be pursuing him. But ahead of him is also, or at least the last he heard, is a very angry brother Esau, who has vowed to kill him. Once the parents were passed away, Esau said, okay, I'll kill my brother Jacob. And we know that Esau coveted the blessings that Jacob was given, but he didn't necessarily covet the birthright. He didn't want the responsibility. He just wanted the goodies. And so sometimes in history, like say with Cain and Abel, when a dispute breaks out over the goodies, then the solution has been to kill the competition, which I don't think is a solution at all, at least not if you think that there's going to be some accountability for that. And this is really strange because Jacob and Esau are twins. They both know the same things. They've been taught the same things. And yet Esau doesn't seem to have, much sensibility when it comes to right behavior. He doesn't really seem to care. He just seems to care more when he gets caught, which, that's everybody we know, right? But on the return, Jacob is kind of squished between these two troubles. And is this Jacob's trouble? Is this a proto-prophecy of Jacob's trouble? Might be. I can see where, in returning from the exile, as Israel comes back, she might be worried about who's behind her, who might be angry with her and chasing her. But she might also be concerned about who's in the land waiting for her, who has vowed to stamp her out, basically when the father isn't looking. And so going back to the land, Jacob's facing some trouble, but he specifically refers to an incident as being his trouble, as Jacob's trouble. So I'm going to look at the events surrounding this. We know that Jacob was very careful. We know that he didn't leave anything behind on the other side of the stream as he's crossing in back into the promised land. He's so careful, even in making this treaty with Laban. He's so careful in preparing for his meeting with Esau. But for some reason, something happens that he really wasn't careful about. And maybe we can trace it back to this carefully planned meeting with Esau. We know that he left no stone uncovered when it came to meeting Esau again, not knowing exactly whether the anger had worn off or not, and whether Esau would approach him as my long-lost brother, or if he would say, here's my chance. I will kill this brother who's made the mistake of coming back. So he's made every preparation. We get all the details, the presents that he sent, how he sent the presents, how he fought with the angel all night long. Nothing was left to chance. How he arranged the camps, everything is very precise when it comes to Jacob. But we also know that something horrible happened. After this encounter, something very terrible happened to Dena. And we say, okay, let's backtrack a little bit. Before the the encounter before Dena is assaulted at Shechem, why isn't she in the meeting with Esau? Because it specifically mentions how he introduces the wives and the sons, but she's not mentioned at all. It's almost like she's not there. Or maybe, tradition says, he actually hid her from Esau. He knew what a rascal Esau was. I mean, he had already married 2 Canaanite wives without his parents' permission. He had a reputation as, what do you call it in Hebrew? Rodef Smolet, a bit of a skirt chaser. And so rather than expose his daughter Dena to Esau, they say that he hid her, and that's why she wasn't present at this big reunion. It's thought that Leah and Rachel were twins, like Esau and Jacob were twins, and it was thought that, Esau was supposed to marry Leah, but Jacob was supposed to marry Rachel. But Esau, as usual, jumped out, took 2 idolatrous Canaanite wives, finally took an Ishmaelite wife. And so he wasn't nearly as concerned about walking in the covenant that Jacob was. But Dena's missing in this. Presumably, maybe she was hidden from lustful Esau. But the next we hear, Jacob has gone to a place called Shechem. And we know that Dena was sexually assaulted there. She was raped. And we say, why did that happen? Why wasn't she protected? And that's a question that we always ask when we see bad things happen to good people. We say, well, they're good people. Why did this happen to them? Well, I think the Holy One is asking the same question of us. Why aren't you protecting one another? That's your job as human beings. I told you how to protect one another. I gave you my word, and if you set things up according to that word, then you should be dealing with things like this. But let's go back to the family. Why didn't Leah, Jacob, and her brothers protect Dena? Well, there's something about Jacob, as wonderful and as spiritual as he was, he seems to have had some lapses, and this is one of them. He allows a young daughter to go out by herself, made her very vulnerable to assault. Clearly, she's too naive to be going alone where she's going. She just wants to go see what the ladies of the land are wearing, probably. Like, what's the latest fashion here? How do they wear their head covers? How long are the hymns here? There's another incident when Jacob sends Joseph on a pretty dangerous journey by himself, which you really didn't do back then. Not if you could help it, because it was understood that traveling was dangerous. There were wild animals, there were bandits, all sorts of things could go wrong. And yet, Jacob sends a 17-year-old boy alone, cross-country, to a place near where his daughter Dena has been raped. So clearly the people are hostile toward Jacob's family, and he's sending him to his hostile brothers. And in the end, what can we say except that's very human of Jacob? It's very human, I think, for parents. Sometimes parents are overprotective, but sometimes parents just assume their kids aren't in trouble. Sometimes they just assume that that's not dangerous to go do. Sometimes they say, well, they'll be okay. What could happen? What could go wrong? And we never want to ask what can go wrong, because something always can. And I think that's what we all fear. Yeah, we can have lapses as human beings. There might be that one time we don't pay attention to something or someone. There might be that one time we make a compromise just for the sake of speed or ease, or I'm in a jam right here and I'll compromise. Maybe I don't know these people too well, but I'll let my daughter or my son go to their house. And not knowing that family, anything could happen. So often we can go from these glorious triumphs and then fail miserably in the next breath. We can fail miserably in the next oversight. And we should be careful about things like this. It should make us more vigilant. But I don't think we should fear that the Father can't help us through our troubles. He helped Jacob through his troubles. But yeah, we do need to be really careful, especially with teenagers. We know that Dena, from the text, it looks like she was probably a teenager. She was a young woman of marriageable age. Same thing with Joseph. He's a 17-year-old boy. He's apparently thinking he's a lot bigger in those britches than he is, but he's a 17-year-old boy traveling alone. What could go wrong? And so maybe Jacob was sitting there just congratulating himself for concealing Dena from Esau and his lustful eyes. Who knows what people are thinking? But how do you imagine he felt when his daughter was violated and then kidnapped by an uncircumcised Hivite? Well, maybe Dena didn't deserve to be erased from that meeting with Esau. Maybe Dena shouldn't have been left alone with idolatrous Shechemites. Sometimes as parents, we really do have to set up some boundaries. And in this case, Dena made it past the boundaries. Joseph, he made it past the boundary of safety and fell into his brothers. Jacob probably should have sniffed that one out before it happened. He knew that there was enmity there. And so if you know that there's that risk of danger, you have to think, what could happen? What could possibly go wrong? You need to think of those things that could possibly go wrong. There's all sorts of things that could possibly go wrong with a 17-year-old boy wandering around by himself. There's all sorts of things that can possibly go wrong with a young lady out mingling with the locals that you don't know much about, and they don't know much about you. There's a balance to be found between their freedom and their safety. And so we had a couple of miserable fails here on the part of Jacob. He had some trouble. And not finding that balance with Dena, it brought on what he literally called his trouble, Jacob's trouble. And then that led to another trouble with Shimon and Levi, her two full brothers. Her two full brothers are more, enthusiastic about protecting her than their father, which seems to be a pattern in Scripture that brothers are a little more passionate about protecting the honor of their sisters. But it's strange that Jacob encounters so much trouble after it looks like he's trying to do the right thing. He crosses back into the land of his fathers. He comes back to the place where it matters about the birthright and the blessing. And in the midst of trying to do the right thing, two horrible things happen. He loses a son and a daughter in a sense. And so the sages, as they're reading these two accounts, they make a note to this. They say, why did this happen? What left Jacob so vulnerable that he actually referred to this time as his trouble? Well, they trace it all the way back to when Jacob was leaving. And remember, he stops at a place called Beit El. And this is where he sees the angels ascending and descending upon the ladder. And he says, surely this is the place. He anoints the rock pillow. And he makes a vow right there. He promises to do something. He says, if you'll be with me, if you'll take care of me on this journey, when I come back, I'll pay a tithe of everything. What we know is, up to this point, the text doesn't record that he did that. He hasn't done it yet. Both Yeshua and his half-brother James, who's, by the way, also his Hebrew name is Yaakov, like Yaakov, Yaakov's trouble. Well, Yeshua's half-brother is also Yaakov. So you might be able to see some parallels between the two. In fact, if you read the account in Acts of the Jerusalem Council and you compare it to what happened with Shimon and Levi and Shechem and Dena, it's a parallel story. It's actually, you're reading the same story. What do we do with the uncircumcised? Are they sincere? Are they not sincere? And the one presiding over it again is going to be Yaakov. So that's why we can read through the Jerusalem Council and realize, I've heard this story before. But here's what Yeshua said about these sorts of things. When you say you will do something, don't delay to do it. In fact, it's so important for you to do what you say you will do that it's better not to say you will do it. Just, if you want to do it, but don't say, don't vow. Don't promise you're going to do it. Matthew 5:37, Yeshua says, but let your statement be yes, yes, or no, no. Anything beyond these is of evil. Just be simple. Don't make grand promises. Don't make detailed refusals. Just say yes or no. Don't go beyond that. Don't try to predict the future. Because when we say an absolute yes or an absolute no, it's as though we believe nothing in the future could change how we perform that yes or don't perform the no. And then James, in James 5:12, he's very specific too. He says, but above all, and that's like super important, when he says above all, my brethren, do not swear, either by heaven or by earth or by any other oath, but yet let your yes be yes, and your no, no, so that you may not fall under judgment. Now that's super heavy. Just say yes or just say no, because if you exceed that, you might fall under judgment, and that's very ominous. Why are we getting this message from Yeshua and his half-brother that we could fall under judgment, that evil could come upon us if we exceed yes or no in telling people how we will behave in the future or what we intend to do in the future? Because in temple times, paying your vows was going to have to be done without delay, right? If you vowed you would do something, typically the vow, you would make the delivery point or the completion point of the vow, this elaborate promise, you would make it during a feast. Like, let's say Jacob, he says, I'm going to bring a tithe. Well, he would bring a tithe at a particular time. If there was a temple, if there was a tabernacle, did he already know the appointed times? I think he probably did. We got some little hints, like after all this happens, he'll build Sukkot for his livestock. He has a sense, even Cain and Abel had a sense of when Sukkot was, because you can look at the descriptions of their offerings and really pin down why they're bringing what they're bringing. And some of the words that are said concerning those offerings. But to do something without delay was thought to perform it. You had 3 opportunities in the year. Not that you couldn't perform it in between, you could. But most people didn't just happen to be in Jerusalem in between the feast, but they would be there for the feast. So the feasts were the markers. Those were the delivery times of the vow. If you completed your vow, then you would bring your sacrifices in at Passover, Shavuot, or Sukkot. It was timed out that way. If you were announcing this vow to the Levite or to a priest, they would probably remind you it's better to do this when you know you're going to be in Jerusalem. But ultimately, it's better not to vow it. It's better not to dedicate it. It's better to just do it. Do it without promising. Do it without vowing. Because ultimately, as we look back at the two stories, it wasn't Esau that brought harm to Dena. It was the lack of supervision that brought harm to Dena. And Jacob apparently had either forgotten or delayed doing what he said he would do. If you will keep me safe and bring me back here in one piece, I will bring this tithe of all that I have. But then he didn't do it. He delayed to complete the vow. And that's the problem. You know, the more blessings we have, the harder it is to protect them. His daughter was a blessing, hard to protect. Joseph was a blessing, hard to protect. So with the blessings, we can't afford to be careless or, just not be attentive, because there are known dangers, such as Esau, but the danger that came to Dena was one that Jacob didn't anticipate. And they say it's just precisely because of what Yeshua and his half-brother warned us about concerning a vow, an improper vow, that it's precisely because Jacob improperly vowed and then didn't complete it in a timely manner, that he created a window of danger that his daughter fell into. They say that judgment and evil came upon Jacob because he didn't bring the flocks to Bethel and pay that vow of a tenth quickly. You see that protection is kind of part of the agreement. Remember when he made the agreement, if you will take care of me and bring me back safe? Well, Adonai completed his part, but then Jacob left the window open on his part. So if you break the vow, or you delay the vow, if you fail to fulfill the agreement, then you're choosing to walk unprotected. Now, we're not talking about salvation. Don't even put that on the table. Right? We're talking about how you walk in your salvation. And so when we leave those windows open, we're depending upon the mercy of Adonai. And Yeshua and his half-brother both said, don't depend on that. Yeshua was still serious, like, don't do that. Don't vow and then not do it. Don't say you won't do it and do it. Don't make these big elaborate promises and then don't deliver, because you don't understand what you're messing with. Words are important. And so that's why I'm going to call this program or this teaching, No More Than. There's sometimes you shouldn't do more than. And Yeshua, his half-brother James, and I'm sure the patriarch Yaakov are all screaming, no more than. When it comes to making promises and vows, don't promise if you can help it. Don't make promises. Don't make promises unless you are 99.9% sure you can follow through on that, because when you don't do it, you create a window of danger. Here's what Jacob had said originally. Genesis 28:20. It says, then Jacob made a vow. See, it's specifically a vow. It's a promise, saying, if God will be with me and will keep me on this journey that I take, and will give me food to eat and garments to wear, and I return to my father's house in safety, then the Lord will be my God. This stone, which I have set up as a pillar, will be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give a tenth to you. So yeah, Adonai kept his part of the bargain. What's Jacob doing? Just dilly-dallying around Shechem. I mean, he's returned in safety. He's got all this wealth. The door's open, Jacob. Just go pay the 10th of your flocks. Return to your father's house. And it's just like Jacob is circling the airport, going round and round and round. And we're all saying, come in for a landing, Yaakov, come in for a landing, because there's going to be trouble if you don't land pretty soon and pay that vow. And that's exactly what happened. That delay in Shechem, this is where Dena is raped. And later, this is where Joseph is kidnapped and sold. Two of his most precious things in his life, two of the greatest blessings in his life, his daughter and his son. And this is why the Jewish sages say concerning these particular events, they say that whoever delays the fulfillment of his vows causes his record to be examined in heaven. And you say, well, that's harsh. That is so Old Testament. No, that's Yeshua. And that's his half-brother James. They're saying the same thing. You want Yaakov's trouble? Then don't follow through on your promises. This, I think, is why Yeshua's calling it evil. He's saying, if you don't do this, this is evil. If you promise and don't deliver, it's evil. And James says, you're coming under judgment. They're saying, this is really important, people. It doesn't matter where you stand with Yeshua. Let your yes be yes and your no, no. Do what you say. But don't be elaborate. Don't promise more just to make yourself look good or because in the moment you want to, but you're not really thinking about, can I actually deliver on this promise? Because they say it's more than an earthly court. Earthly courts are set up to reflect heavenly courts. Remember, Moses had to do exactly what he saw in heaven. And so our earthly courts, can they extend mercy? They can. But the heavenly court, you really don't want to mess with. You don't want to risk it. And so, because this is a reality, an earthly court, which today it's kind of a joke, but an earthly court is supposed to be a reflection of the heavenly courts. And, maybe this is why we don't like legal systems, because they don't reflect the heavenly courts, or maybe we don't like them because sometimes they do. But we are obligated to establish courts of justice so that we can function in fairness and truth. And this is supposed to teach us some aspect of divine judgment and authority that we will all eventually have to answer to. And maybe just the subversion of our court systems, as part of the adversary, trying to mar or, fade out, obliterate this understanding that we have of, I deal with earthly courts, but I really need to be concerned about the heavenly courts. If we're scornful of earthly courts and justice and laws, then we will also be scornful of the heavenly system of justice and laws. So when we bring an obligation upon ourselves, a contractual obligation, it becomes binding, whether you're on earth or in heaven. In temple times, you could take a sacred vow and it was processed through the temple system. And we can see in the book of Acts a more practical application of it, because as they're telling Paul about the rumors about what he's teaching, they say, well, we can clear this up. We've got these guys who have taken on a Nazirite vow, just pay their expenses to complete their vow at Shavuot, one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts, when you would pay those vows. And everybody will know that the rumors going around are not true, that yes, you do uphold the Torah. And so when you completed your vow, you had to notify the temple authorities that you did complete it, and then you brought your sacrifices in. If it was, say, a Nazirite vow, you would have your hair cut. There were expenses. So there was human oversight. But yeah, that's important, super important. But see, when you take a vow directly before heaven's court, like Jacob did, it's like he went straight to the throne. He went straight into heaven's court. He made a vow directly. He didn't go through the agency of angels. He didn't go through the agency of the temple. He went directly there. And, there's a blessing in being able to approach that throne room, but there's also a lot of caution. If you make a promise, like he did at Beth El, if you make a promise, a vow, then you're putting that case directly into the heavenly court. There's no human judge or temple court who can now judge you and extend leniency due to extenuating circumstances. And so Yeshua, as he's teaching about it, he suggests that the same legal principles that we go by apply to the heavenly court. What if Jacob had been held up because of sickness or something? Something slowed the camp down. Could he not have said, could I have some grace here? I'm going to camp here. I haven't forgotten my vow. I need a little bit of extra time. I'm sure the court would have extended that because it's saying, I haven't forgotten what I said I would do. It's just that life happened. And so Yeshua, he builds on this. And there is a version of the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew that's out there. It's called the Shem Tov. And then it was translated back into English. So it's traveled a bit too, just like when you read an English translation of Hebrew or Greek. You're getting another translation except from a Hebrew gospel. And it's known that the Jews did have in their possession a Hebrew Gospel of Matthew. Some of the church fathers cite out of it. And so I had to get my hands on one of those just to do some comparisons from the Greek versions. And so in the Hebrew Matthew, and I'm again going to translate into English, it's in Matthew chapter 5, verses 33 through 37. And that's going to sound familiar to you. Right? And here's what he says. Again, you have heard what was said to those of long ago. You shall not swear by my name falsely, but you shall return to the Lord your oath. Right? If you swear to Adonai you're going to do something, you have to return it. Like Jacob, he had to bring that 10th because he swore he would. And as we're, again, translating into English, this is where an English version from most translations would say, but. When you're reading the Beatitudes, notice how often it says, but. You have heard it said, but I say to you. And then when you read it in Hebrew, you realize that's not but, it's and. The Vav, the Hebrew letter Vav, it can be used as but. But most likely and most often, the Vav means and. It has to make sense in context. And so instead of saying, but I say to you, try and. It makes perfect sense right here. You shall return to the Lord your oath, and I say to you, not to swear in vain in any matter, neither by heaven, because it is the throne of God, nor by earth, because it is the footstool of his feet, nor by Jerusalem, because it is the city of God, nor by your head, for you were not able to make one hair white or black. But let your words be yes, yes, or no, no. Everything in addition to this is evil. Wow, that's strong. But it makes a whole lot of sense. He's clarifying. He says, this is what you've heard. In fact, it's not just what you heard, it's what is written. But you have to remember, a lot of people could not read. very few people could afford their own Torah scrolls. And so they had to go to the synagogue to hear the Torah read. That's most likely how the average person was going to learn the Torah. They were going to hear it read aloud. And so he says, again, you have heard. Where would you hear this? You would hear it in the synagogue when the Torah, when Moses was read. Well, it was said to those of long ago, you shall not swear by my name falsely, but you shall return to the Lord your oath. That's in the Torah. And Yeshua clarifies this. He says, and I say to you not to swear in vain in any matter. He's saying, yes, that's exactly what it means. That's the way it was understood. Don't swear to something falsely. It goes on, neither by heaven, because it's the throne of God. This is where the heavenly court is. Nor by earth, because it's his footstool, even by the earthly courts. Avoid that. Even his feet are in the earthly courts. It says, nor by Jerusalem, because it is the city of God. But let your words be yes, yes, or no, no. And we'll think about, like, why did he say yes, yes, or no, no? But going back to Jacob's trouble, that location at Beit El where he was supposed to pay the tithes of his flocks. Remember, it literally means in Hebrew, house of God. And he identifies this place. He says, this is the place. So where he took his oath, within the text, connected him directly with the gates of heaven, directly to the throne, directly showing how the earthly and the heavenly were connected in that particular place. And even he identifies it as Beit El, the house of God. Later we know the house of God was built in Jerusalem. And so Jacob pours out the oil on the stone. We know that the temple, the house temple, it was also dedicated with oil. And then Jacob goes on to swear upon the things because he says, this is the place, this is the anointing oil, this is the connection to heaven. And he swears on the place where he laid his head. Is that coincidence? Yeshua says, don't swear by your head. Don't do that. Look back at Jacob's trouble and learn. Jacob swore upon the things that Yeshua specifically said, don't. Don't swear by heaven. Don't swear by the earth. Don't swear by the holy city. Don't swear by your head. So the context of taking the name Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh in vain is seen to be a legal one. In the Jewish understanding of that commandment, it means to take a false oath in his name. Because what you're actually doing, if you don't perform it, you're giving a false testimony in a legal matter. You've just engaged into a legal contract. You have now given false testimony if you don't perform it. And it's coming from Exodus 20, verse 7. You shall not take the name of the Lord your God in vain, for the Lord will not leave him unpunished who takes his name in vain. And Yeshua is saying, nothing's changed, folks. It's still a commandment, still good. Don't swear falsely in a human court using his name. And especially don't go before the very throne itself and swear by his name. Just say yes or no. I intend to. I want to, with your help. And so Yeshua is using the vav, the and, to clarify, to extend it to an oath that's taken before a heavenly court. Literally in heaven, b'shamayim. And that's what he says. And I say to you, not to swear in vain in any matter, neither by heaven, b'shamayim. Because it's the throne of God, nor by your head. You're not able to make one hair white or black. He's not saying we should never testify in court under oath. That would be contrary to the commandment. Sometimes we're supposed to be a witness in court. But Yeshua is clarifying it. Instead of hearing, but I say to you, listen to it as Yeshua's clarification. And And I say to you. He's not changing the commandments. That letter is Vav. It means and. He says, Ve'ani omer lachem. In fact, if we look in chapter 5 of Matthew, the Beatitudes, it follows this pattern. Verses 17 and 18, it assures the disciples that Yeshua did not come to annul the Torah. It tells them plainly, I did not come to annul the Torah, but to fulfill it. In Hebrew, that's lehishalem. I came to fulfill it, to pay it, basically. When something's paid in full, when something's brought to its greatest fulfillment. So what is he doing with his statements? Clarifying. He's not annulling anything. So these but statements in the original language were likely and statements, which completely changes our perception that somehow, as Yeshua is standing there teaching the Beatitudes, he's somehow changing the ancient words. You have heard it said, but I say. No, that's not what he's doing. There's only a couple of cases in these Beatitudes that you're going to hear the word but in Hebrew, which is abal. And one of those is going to be verse 37. Right? Now let's see how he uses abal or but. In 33 it says, again you have heard what was said to those of long ago. You shall not swear by my name falsely, but you shall return to the Lord your oath. And I say to you, not to swear in vain in any matter, neither by heaven, because it is the throne of God, nor by your head, for you are not able to make one hair white or black. But, now we get a but. Now we get an aval. But let your words be yes, yes, or no, no. Everything in addition to this is evil. So Yeshua is telling his disciples that taking an oath independently of oversight is dangerous, because you're making an appearance before a heavenly court. You're making an appearance before the throne. Is it scary to go before a human court? It is. How much scarier is it to go before the throne of heaven? And if it's important not to testify falsely before a human court and judge, then how much more important is it not to be presumptuous and swear falsely before the heavenly court? That's why the delays are dangerous. Because if you experience some hardship in paying a vow to the temple, then a temple judge or a temple court could show mercy and extend the terms. You see, this is what's happened. You know, I made a vow concerning my crops and they got wiped out by a wildfire. I need an extension. I need until next year. They can show mercy. But it's built in what you owe. Why would you take a vow? Why would you make an extra promise? Why would you add words you didn't need to add and open a window of danger? Because if you open that window of danger by not keeping a vow to the heavenly court, Yeshua says it's dangerous. He says evil and judgment can follow an inattentive, slow payer. And he says, yes, yes, no, no. That double principle, when he says, let your yes be yes or your no be no, anything in addition to this is evil. That takes us back to times in Scripture where we've heard double, like Abraham, Abraham, or Moses, Moses. And the usual response to something like that is, Hineni, here I am. It says you're available. You can participate in executing the agreement. And then we can read in Jeremiah 32, 1 through 16, that sometimes when a text is doubled, it means to write 2 copies of something, like 2 copies of a deed that was sealed with a signet ring, and it becomes part of a legal process. So in the Hebrew Matthew, Yeshua is clarifying using the scriptural double principle. of legal documents. Let your words be yes, yes, or no, no. Everything in addition to that is evil. In other words, use the legal system. Use counsel. Have somebody else there. Hopefully somebody who's wise, someone who can identify a foolish vow and caution you against taking it. Like, don't do that. Let's not make a vow. If you want to do it, just do it. But don't promise. Don't vow. You know, in Torah law, underage daughters, they could have their vows overruled by fathers or husbands if they were really a young wife. But that provision is not made for men. And so they might be more presumptuous in their vows and promises. They might think they've got this and just shun any legal counsel or wise oversight. And then, like Jacob, enter into that agreement with heaven all by himself, and then they forget sometimes, or they might be slow to fulfill it. And what's that going to do? It's going to open a record examination in the heavenly court. And that can open the door to evil because you've lost some protection there. Remember, the vow was all about protection? So until you pay the vow, you've entered into a danger zone. You've done more than you should have done. You've said more than you should have said. You promised more than you should have promised. And so Adonai had to remind Jacob, remember what you promised? Remember what you vowed? I really need you to do that, because it doesn't please him that you've left yourself and your family vulnerable. And so if the Holy One himself issues that invitation to an agreement with the double summons, then that's something we can learn from. As human beings, we need oversight. If we're entering into a binding agreement with earth or heaven, have somebody take a look at it. Is it something you really need to sign your name to? Is it something you need to promise to do? The Holy One can guarantee safety if he's inviting you into the agreement. And even if the task becomes frightening, we know we're only doing this, we've only entered into this agreement because he said, come on. But Jacob even added a foolish vow that brought about the death of his beloved Rachel. Remember that? Whoever has done this will die. Sometimes it's what we don't know that should make us pause before we swear an oath or make a promise that we might not be willing to keep or able to keep, or find out, oh no, that's not the situation I thought it was at all. And now I've just pronounced death over someone because I didn't know all the details. The moral of the story? Take counsel. Don't do more than you need to. Take your time. Don't promise to do it sooner than you need to. Keep it simple. Don't add a bunch of unnecessary words to your answers or your intentions. Keep your promises. There's trouble enough walking as the house of Jacob without adding words that bring on Jacob's trouble and expose us to more. And you say, well, how do I even make an agreement with someone? Certain things you can't get out of. You know, if you're buying a house on credit, you're probably going to have to sign on the dotted line. But be super careful when you make an agreement with the heavenly court. Super careful how you word those things. And the safest way to do that, we are told twice, at least twice, probably more than that, but there's two easy places to go to where we can find the pattern for, like, if we say we're going to do something, how to word it so that we don't open a danger window that might affect us, our families, somebody we care about. The first, of course, we'll go back to Yeshua's half-brother, James, in James 4:15. And the context of this is he's talking to people who are very loose with their tongues, and they're saying, well, it's, in a few days we're going to go into such and such city, and we're going to do this, and then we're going to go to that city, and we're going to do that. We think out loud all the time about our plans. We have to be careful how we word it. So he corrects them, and he says, you ought to say, if the Lord wills, we will live, and also do this or that. You don't even know if you'll live long enough to keep that vow. You don't even know if you'll live long enough to keep that promise. So this is why you'll often hear, if you hear Jewish people talking about something that might happen in the future, like, well, we'll have class next week on Wednesday, you'll hear them precede it with Bezrat Hashem. Bezrat Hashem. With the help of God, we will have class next Wednesday, because none of us are assured that we will be here next Wednesday. We don't know the future. And so that qualifies anything you might say, if the Lord wills it. If it's the Father's will, then I plan to do this. You see how that just keeps that window shut, that window of danger of you making a promise that you don't even know if you can keep? And here's an example. As Paul is talking in Acts 18:21, it says, but taking leave of them and saying, I will return to you again, if God wills. He set sail from Ephesus. And it's that simple. We don't have to make grand promises. We don't have to make all these assurances. If you have to enter into a legal agreement on this earth, either to perform work, or to pay for work, you might have to sign a contract. But be careful. Read the fine print. And when you tell somebody you're going to do something, even on this earth, even if we're not talking to the heavenly throne itself, even to another person, just say, if it's the Father's will, Bezrat Hashem, right? If it's His will, this will happen. And on a more practical, if you might be around somebody who doesn't understand that sort of language, like, really? Can I trust you? Like, you think God's going to do it? Sometimes people don't understand where we're coming from. Then you can figure out different ways of saying it. Let's say that you say you're going to go to a certain place and do a certain job or a certain piece of work on a particular day. That's your intention. But you have no idea what's going to come up between now and that particular day that you're telling that person you will come do that job. So it doesn't hurt to say something like, my intention is, I'm going to put this on my schedule for. And then, if nothing comes up between now and then, that's my intention. There's a huge difference between intention and a promise. Because if that person is expecting you on that day, at that time, and they're sitting and they're waiting, heaven doesn't like that. In fact, heaven doesn't like waiting and waiting and waiting for us to perform our vows. So Yeshua says, just say yes or no. Just say, keep it simple. If Adonai wills it, it's going to happen. It's my intention for me to do that. It's in my intention for me to be there. But I don't know if I'll get sick. I don't know if somebody that I'm responsible for will be sick. I don't know if I'll, turn the key in the car and the car won't start. None of us know any of the things that are going to happen. So as believers in Messiah Yeshua, maybe one thing that can set us apart is how we tell people about what might happen in the future and how we make those commitments. And it might be that you never miss an appointment. You always show up 100% of the time. You know what? it's still safer to let your yes be yes and your no, no. It's always safer to reference the future as Adonai wills, as the Father wills, because we don't know the future. And so this is one case where it's not really a matter of more than, it's a matter of no more than, no more. Just keep it simple and keep your promises.